Hi, and welcome. My name is Johnny Frederick, and today we'll be talking about Latin American literature from the 1990s through today. Latin American literature became globally prominent during the second half of the 20th century. Over the years and throughout the 1990s, Latin American literature has developed in rich and complex diversity of themes, forms, and styles. This literature was hurtfully truthful and unromantic. Ashley Saylor, Nicole Krauss, and myself researched articles based on the literature from stories El Mundo de Afuera by Jorge Franco, and this story tells of a father isolating his daughter from the outside world. It is a very unromantic piece of literature. The second author we researched is Raul Tola. He wrote Flores Amarillas. The novel depicts a story of the rise and fall of a Peruvian man who makes his money from producing textiles. The novel is sprinkled with mafia fiction, personal alliances, and Peruvian politics. The final author we come across is Fernando Vallejo. He wrote Casablanca La Bella. The main focus is God, death, and Colombia. First, El Mundo de Afuera by Jorge Franco, which was reviewed by Edward Waters Hood. The story tells about a kidnapping of Don Diego. Don falls in love with a woman, then builds a castle for her in Medellin. This castle then becomes a prison for their daughter, who is isolated from the outside world. The daughter then creates an imaginary life for herself in the woods. It's not as though her father doesn't love her, he just wants to protect her from the outside world. Throughout the story, details of the past are developed through the use of parallel stories and flashbacks. Franco states that some of the violent events in the story are actually based on real events that took place in the city of Medellin in the 1970s. Jorge Franco's writing style coincides with filmmaking training, making El Mundo de Afuera a very visual novel. Franco's tactful use of flashbacks and development of action during different parts of the story maintain a high level of suspense for the reader. This piece of text relates very well to The Hour of the Star, written by Clarice Lispector. That story, just in case you forgot, is about a girl, Macabea, living in a very poor town. However, she is not aware of how tragic her life is. So the narrator feels sympathy for Macabea. Macabea feels for herself much like the father of the daughter imprisoned in a home he built for her. Macabea and the girl in Franco's novel have similarities as well. They find comfort in the little things. Macabea paints her nails red, she sips on coffee, and they both live their lives the best they can. The narrator wants her to see how her life can be better, which is similar to the father of Franco's novel. The father wants to keep his daughter from danger and wants to protect her, like any father would. He believes he is doing the best thing for his daughter. Therefore, the daughter creates an imaginary life, just like Macabea does when she dies. And Macabea's death is described as leaving the earth like a movie star. Franco says that the tragic events in his novel are much like the real events that took place in the city of Medellin. These concepts relate very closely to what happens in the slums of Rio, where Macabea lives. Secondly, Flores Amarillas by Raul Tola, which was reviewed by Cesar Fiera and tells the story of the rise and fall of Sayero Versaglio, a Peruvian man who makes his money from producing textiles during the second half of the 20th century. He is the grandson of a working-class Italian who was a big supporter of the reunification efforts in the 19th century Italy. They are forced to leave their home in northern Italy in order to save their lives. Then they soon settle in Peru. 2 generations later, Sayero becomes a self-made entrepreneur. With much wealth and power in the Peruvian politics, soon his business practices become tainted, and it results in his demise. Flores Amarillas can be interpreted as a documented chronicle of Italian migration to Peru, and also a view on Peruvian history. The story also offers insight to mafia fiction, and personal alliances among family members may seem to be stable. However, loyalties are much more fragile than they appear. This novel interrupts loyalty among family and has a great deal of realism. The novel by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Chronicle of a Death Foretold, has a theme of family loyalty. Angela Vicario has married, and then her husband finds out the night of their wedding that she is not a virgin. Angela's brother take it upon themselves to protect the honor of their sister. They murder the man that took her innocence from her. No one intervened to stop the brothers of his murder. It was their duty to murder the man who dishonored their sister. Like Raul Tola's novel, the reality of situations is cunning. Both novels show where loyalty lies, which is a common theme in Latin American literature and in reality. Finally, Casablanca La Baya by Fernando Vallejo, which was reviewed by Marcelo Rioseco. And this tells that Vallejo is more wicked than ever before, and he writes the same way a sniper shoots, knowing he has nothing to lose. Vallejo's main focus in most of his writing is God, death, and Colombia, which can be demonstrated in Casablanca La Baya. The protagonist of the novel buys a house without seeing it in Medellin, Colombia, the city where he was born. This house is located in an old neighborhood where most of the homes have already been rebuilt, and since the house needs repairs, he hires workers to do the job. The hired help ends up being useless and actually destroys the home. After arriving, he realizes that his place is not the same as it once was, and the people that should have helped him actually robbed him. Vallejo uses the house repairs to represent the disaster that already exists in order to demonstrate that time has passed, but the narrator is still the same, and is not mentally ready to accept the changes that have developed in Colombia. Vallejo uses the house as a metaphor of Colombia, a country that has changed a great deal over the years and is almost unrecognizable. Casablanca La Baya then almost transforms into a religious story, considering God created man and obviously Colombia. The story goes from describing the problems of an old house to describing the horrible things in the world that God has created. In the vintage book of Latin American stories, The Wardrobe, The Old Man, and Death, written by Julio Ramon Ribeiro, relates to the protagonist's story. The short story tells about a man who has had a wardrobe that has been with him all his life. His ancestors have used this wardrobe, and it is a huge piece of the family. Disaster strikes when the mirror of the wardrobe breaks. The mirror represented the past and the future of the family. Once the mirror is destroyed, the father becomes devastated, much like the protagonist in Casablanca La Baya, when his house is destroyed. These novels dictate the devastation that happens in Latin America. Culture and family are major parts of Latin America, and the man who loses his home, along with the man who loses his mirror, are very relatable. Nicole, Ashley, and I decided upon 6 words that we believed were important throughout our text, and I'll go through them very quickly. So the first was Casablanca, which is the largest city in Morocco. Second is demise, which is the end of failure of an enterprise or a person's death. Third is entrepreneur, a person who organizes their own business. Fourth is foretold, which is the past and present principle. Fifth is Medellin, second largest city in eastern Colombia. And sixth is realism, the attitude of accepting a situation. Now, we believed realism was important because in the 1990s literature, realism takes effect because within the literature, they have factual information, things that actually happened. As for Casablanca and Medellin, these are 2 major places in Latin America that had significant meaning with the literature. And entrepreneur and demise both related to one another because it's someone who wanted to work for themselves but ended up unsuccessful. And lastly, foretold, we believe that the past and present principle are extremely important in Latin American culture. So that is why we believe these 6 words have significant meaning throughout the text. In conclusion, most of Latin American literature is relatable. From the 1990s through now, the novels and short stories are filled with culture, loyalty, and love. These 3 themes are very strong in emotion and bring family together. Whether someone is protecting their loved ones or living in horrible conditions, the ultimate ending is beautiful. Thank you.